I come from a different perspective. I'm not an elected official, so I have to deal with the here and now of what's happening with the base realignment and closure and as it affects Montgomery County. But again, we look at that and what are we going to do now, and then what are we going to do in the long term. But mostly the concern is what are we going to do now. Right now, we have projects that we're developing that need funding. The state is addressing a certain part of the transportation infrastructure there, but they don't have enough funding to execute the entire plan as we would like to see it. We have another major project around the metro station and pedestrian access. We have other projects. The bottom line is we need to look to the federal government, and in the old days that was a pretty good place to look. I worked on Capitol Hill for 30 years. I'm used to the mood swings that go on there, and we are entering a mood swing now. So I don't know that there's going to be a lot of federal money available in the next several years, because right now the mood is against federal spending, and we're dealing with what is still perceived as a downturn in the economy on the federal level. We may be able to get some funding in the very near term. That is before the next election kicks in. But that's the short term. Now in the long term, we have to address these projects, but like Rob and Beverly and everyone else is going to say, we have to look at all the options. I know in the projects we're going to talk about in this roundtable, we may have to look at public-private partnerships and look seriously at that. There's a lot of projects that are in competition with each other. Some of them will get substantial federal funding, but some of them won't. And so you have to find a way to fill in those gaps. Some of them will get substantial state funding, but again, not enough to see the projects to completion. So we have to look at creative ways that might include public-private financing.
If I could just start by sharing sort of a story from this summer. My interns unleashed some stuff we found in the back of our files, newspaper headlines from the Frederick News Post from 1965 that said, "Chamber warns of congestion on I-70 South." And here we are, 45 years later, living congestion on I-270. So it makes you wonder about how much progress we've made in 45 years. We are actually still talking about the same things we were in 1965. I just want to say, I mean, given both the vision that the county council, the county executive have laid out for the county, and also the projected growth that Patty started by talking about, obviously our infrastructure is imperative. Our improvements in our infrastructure are an imperative, and we need, I think, a significant injection of revenues in order to make that happen. I agree with everything Rob said as it relates to both the short-term and the long-term needs for funding. I do want to make one point, which I think a lot of what gets forgotten about is that we do have a bimodal system, that a lot of our problems as it relates to transportation are related to pretty boring things like intersections and turn lanes, which Phil can tell you all about from dealing with Cedar Lane and 355. So I just want to make a point that we need a robust bimodal system. We do have a lot of attention on these big transit projects, which are incredibly important to having a more walkable, transit-oriented community. But there are smaller dollar ticket, significant things that can be done to improve how traffic flows in our community. So want to make sure we don't lose sight of those things. And as Beverly mentioned from the outset, a lot of those things are the things that in the CTP and in the roadshow we have had the bad news about for the past few years, that those are the projects like Georgia Avenue, Randolph Road, and some of these major things that have been deferred. And so it's important just to know that we need both highway and transit improvements in order to move us forward.
Good afternoon. Pleasure to be with you all. I think Phil touched on probably the most significant piece, is that we're kind of knocking on the door. We've got all the stuff that's ready for the here and now, that's here and now. And the reality is that many of you in this room and many of us up here have worked very hard over the last 8 to 10 years to increase the visibility of a lot of transportation projects, but in particular the Quarter Cities Transitway and the growth that Patty mentioned. We've put the land use in place to allow for that to occur. But now the challenge is to actually we don't have a long time to talk about it. We've got projects, whether it's Quarter Cities, Purple Line, Red Line in Baltimore, the widening, they're there right now. They're all almost to a point where they're ready to move forward. Decisions will be made as to what the appropriate alignments will be. So in the course of the next 12 months, all of them will kind of be at a point where they can go someplace. And in particular, the growth that we're anticipating isn't going to happen. And the interesting thing is there are those in this community that would say, great, we're not going to have growth. That's a good thing. But the reality is the growth that we're going to experience going forward is much more of what we need to see. Much more of a sustainable nature, much more transit-oriented, but you're not going to see it if we don't have the resources for transportation. And so it's very challenging. You're seeing right now local jurisdictions regionally and across the country paying more for transportation than any point in history. And so we're coming up with new and unique ways. We had a conversation yesterday at the County Council about what we're going to do to try to, the plan that we're going to put in place for financing of White Flint. And most of that is going to be done through local government dollars, through special taxing districts, through a variety of things, working with the private sector. And it's not a question, I think, of should we be looking at public-private partnerships. I don't think we have a choice. We're going to have to do that, and we're going to have to do it very quickly. And we've had some conversations with the Secretary to try and get that underway. But we're at a point right now where some real clear political decisions are going to have to be made. We've got two folks running for governor, each of which think that Montgomery County is important to their reelection, or election or reelection, or I guess both reelections. That's appropriate for either of them. And it's important for us to put out there that and they're both talking about jobs, they're both talking about economic growth, that probably the most significant corridor in the state of Maryland that you can see that growth is right here. And we as a council predicated that growth on whether or not transportation infrastructure exists. And so if we start to see an economic comeback, you'll get a little bit of stuff here. We'll begin to put some things on the ground, but it's only going to get so far before it's going to come to a screeching halt because there isn't transportation infrastructure, and the rest of what could occur won't occur. And so we've got a pretty short time frame within which to actually not come up with great grandiose visions, but to actually come up with dollars on the barrelhead that we can actually start right now to get transportation funded, starting with the Quarter Cities Transitway. And so we really have to do that, and it's going to take political will, it's going to take flexibility on the part of our business community, on the part of our local and state governments and federal government to actually come up with new and unique ways to get there. But we have to do it now, or we're going to miss a significant opportunity of economic expansion because we're just not prepared, we're not in a position to be able to benefit from it.